Hey everyone, RogueGold here, and today I wanted to talk about communication with The Division 2, a very divisive topic, but I think we're seeing the game and the devs running into an issue with it right now, and I think that's worth commentating on. Communication when it comes to The Division and just live service games in general is a very unique and odd thing, because it comes in waves, and I wouldn't say there's one proper standard that developers should or need to follow. Some games continually pour out tons and tons of info and back and forth with the devs. Some games are more reserved in what and when they speak on topics, and some hardly say anything at all. Sometimes these communication levels stay consistent for long periods of time, and sometimes they rise and fall depending on content release schedules or behind the scenes circumstances, corporate guidelines. Like I said, it is a very vague and hard to track subject. And one thing I want to make clear before getting any further in is that as a player, I do not have the insight or authority to be making definitive statements on how the game or devs should handle information and communication. And the same goes for any of you watching who don't work on The Division 2. You might not want to hear it, but at the end of the day, there are simply factors that we do not know about or would never even think to consider when it comes to this stuff. And when you think or comment to a developer, just explain this or that to us, that may seem like an easy ask, but it could be a very large burden on them for a multitude of reasons, so I just want to make it clear that all of the following comments and ideas I'm going to present come from the perspective of an outsider who doesn't know all the facts, who just sits here and enjoys playing the game. Take from that what you will. But getting back to it, from my perspective and many others in the community that I've seen lately, there are many who are dissatisfied with The Division 2's current communication between the developers and the community. But beyond that, for myself, I think we've reached a point where there are just some definite flaws in how the transfer of information is being handled, and I think it's reaching a point where it's becoming detrimental to the game's image and player base. So let's talk specifics. And firstly, I want to point out what I think the game is and has been doing well for a while, as I think it's important to point out what is working well so as to provide a reference point to potentially help improve other areas. Those things being game status updates via the main Twitter account, as well as the Trello known issues board as a whole. To briefly go into detail, anytime the game is experiencing login issues, outages, maintenances, etc., we can almost always rely on the main account to keep us informed about what's going on. Even when it's only potentially affecting a smaller portion of the player base, which opens the door for the usual internet trolls to try and dunk on the devs, so that aspect of communication is and has pretty much always been solid. In addition, the known issues board over on Trello was something we saw get introduced last year, and in my view, it has proven to be a phenomenal resource. It allows us as players to gain a deeper insight into the devs' awareness, investigations, and plans for bugs, reworks, and other future changes, and that's something we simply previously did not have, so that's been great. And like I said, those two aspects to the game's communication are working great, in my opinion. But let's now shift to what I think is not working so well and try and provide a few potential changes or solutions. For me, there's three main things I want to touch on: centralization, consistency, and explanation. Let's talk about the first one of centralization. And what I'm referring to with this is what I think is the need for better centralized communication, because these days it feels like players need to source several different spots in order to gain the information that they need that could probably all be delivered in one place. For example, in order to know what bugs or issues the devs are aware of or are planning fixes for, players need to check the known issues board, which we only sometimes get updates on the Twitter account for when it's updated. Sometimes certain issues or updates aren't shared on Trello or the main Twitter account, but instead developers will tweet about them on their personal Twitter accounts, which, don't get me wrong, I greatly appreciate them dedicating their time and platform to discussing game-related topics. But again, it begs the question of the efficiency for communication. Consistency, pretty self-explanatory. As I mentioned earlier in the video, communication can shift pretty dramatically for live games depending on the content release schedule or other factors, and I would say that for Division 2, what we've seen so far this year is that communication is pretty heavily skewed towards when big updates and content releases are happening. And it's not that I'm expecting the devs to keep us posted on new content progress every single week, that's not what I'm referring to, but it's more the updates and information we want and sometimes need to know about bugs and other live issues, and it seems like when they're present closer to an update's launch, we seem to get more regular communication about it, yet when they're present mid-season, like we just had the whole double companion debacle, it seems to get way less visibility or communication from the team about its underlying causes, issues, and their plan to resolve it. So consistency is one aspect that I would appreciate seeing improve, especially for those mid-season slumps that we seem to be in right now. And lastly, as I mentioned on the list, explanations. Now, this one is pretty broad, but I think there are a lot of things that it covers. Just to name a few examples, over on the known issues board, we had a PvP item that was being investigated for the first few months of the year, that being the devs looking into removing corner peeking that can happen by combining a half shield and a scope when aiming around corners. This was something many, myself included, were anticipating. I was certainly excited by the prospect of it being gone after having been on the receiving end of people's abuse on it for years. That was until it got moved to the will not fix category of the Trello board a few months back with no explanation or comments on what had happened, at least from what I saw. Maybe there was a comment made by a dev on their own account that I missed, but again, if that were the case, I think that just loops back to the centralization issue. Overall, if it ended up just being that they couldn't fix the issue like they originally planned, that's all good. The investigation of it at all was appreciated, but what would have been really nice was to get just even a brief explanation of why it had been moved to that category, instead of getting people's hopes up for a few months and then silently snatching that away. Another more recent example, the whole descent exploit and the double companion bug. Now, those two issues might seem pretty separated, but one of the big points of discussion I've seen recently, and actually one of the main reasons I ultimately wanted to make this video, was that I saw quite a few people in my own community as well as the larger player base asking, do devs consider using double companion in-game as an exploit? Is there a risk of receiving account punishment if I use it? And I think this was a completely valid concern and question to have. We all just saw the severity of punishment the Massive is willing to dish out to those abusing exploits with the Descent farm. So, rightly so, people want to know what is and isn't considered an exploit. Now, at one point, Morten Ryberg, who if you didn't know is the game's product director, did make a comment on his Twitter account stating that using double companion is not considered an exploit, and that there would be no punishment given to anyone who used it. But I think this ties in every issue that we've just talked about. Players have a lack of information on what the game does and doesn't consider an exploit, in some cases making them hesitant to simply log on and play the game, which is very bad for the game. There's no centralized communication point where they can go and ask if something is considered an exploit, and even if they do know to search up these devs' own accounts to ask, there's no guarantee or consistency that they'll receive a response. And I mean, rightly so, it's a personal social media account. But I think in particular that really highlights some of the flaws in the communication that we've seen lately, and it also unveiled some greater cracks that seem to have been forming for a while. So, it's not great. Fortunately, I do have a solution to propose. Keep in mind, once again, like I said at the start of the video, I do not work on the game. I don't know Ubisoft's PR guidelines. I don't know the feasibility of any of this stuff. I just watch the gaming industry from a consumer perspective, and I know what has worked for other titles, and that is a development team account. Now, what is this, you might be wondering? I know many games do it, but the most relevant and similar one to the division that I can point out is with Destiny. I'll leave a link to the account in the description so that you can go and check it out if you would like, but what it is an account separate from the main Destiny or Bungie Twitter accounts, and it serves as that more in-depth, nitty-gritty communication point between the developer and the player. The bio for the account reads, news, updates, and insights from the developers on Destiny 2, send us your D2 feedback here, and they will do just that. They'll make more in-depth posts and clarifications on things shared in news articles, they'll make targeted feedback posts asking for players' ideas, and I think most importantly, they will respond to people's questions and replies to either clarify things further, give explanations, you name it. And so, I think the Division 2 could really benefit from a similar kind of account. Like I said, Destiny is not the only game that utilizes this kind of thing, and from any of them that I've come across, what I've seen is that it can prove to be really beneficial, because the implementation of this kind of a resource solves, I think, all three of those communication issues I pointed out earlier. Players who want it now have a centralized point of communication that they could flock to, knowing that live game issues, feedback points, and other topics would be addressed by this account, and hopefully they would no longer need to monitor several different developer accounts to get updates on things that we need to know. The consistency in communication would hopefully improve. If you truly allow this to be a team-wide account, several different levels and types of devs could access it and give their insights into their department, answer different questions, all of that, and greater explanations. Utilizing this team account type of platform, Massive and Bucharest could use this to get into the more nitty-gritty of why certain things happened the way they did, why they were delayed or canceled, why something is considered an exploit or not. You know, all that stuff that we want to know about, but is either not appropriate or feasible to really break down with the official news account, or is just too taxing for an individual dev to try and break down on their own accounts. I truly just think having some type of Division 2 team account would be really positive for the community as a whole, creating a new cornerstone for frequent Trello board updates. becoming a resource for players to monitor for information, allowing more in-depth communication and explanation from the team about why or how certain things are happening in the game. And bonus positive, this would allow for some better anonymity to occur. If you're not a Twitter or other social media user, the internet is a nasty place. And as I said earlier, as much as I love and appreciate the devs who take their time and use their platform to discuss the game, I don't know how they do it sometimes with the vile and targeted comments and replies that they'll often get. And so by shifting that type of communication to a more anonymized resource, that protects the health and sanity of the developers, which at least to me is something that is very important. Mentioning Destiny again, I know that's been a big point of contention lately, and it just sucks to see, so ideally this kind of a platform could help with that. Overall guys, those are the majority of my thoughts. As you all know, I love this game, I want it to succeed, and I really do think that the implementation of this kind of a team account, or any other new communication innovations aimed at alleviating the current issues that we're seeing, would really help boost community confidence and morale, which is something that we've seen wavering a bit in the recent weeks. But those are just my thoughts, and I want to hear yours. What issues, if any, do you think the game's communication has been facing lately, and what solutions do you think could be pursued to try and fix it? Could a team account like I proposed help, or do you think they should put their efforts in another direction? Whatever your thoughts are, I want to hear them. As always, let's start a discussion that can hopefully help in some way improve the state of the game. That's always the goal here. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If so, be sure to click that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on future videos like this. And that's all I've got for you today, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching. Stay safe. I'll see you in the next one. RogueGold. Ow.